One of the most influential people for 2013, Edward Snowden, released a holiday message to world leaders, the first time he's spoken out on video in months. The former contractor told governments they need to ratchet back the surveillance programs that have dominated headlines this year. Take a look.
Privacy matters. Privacy is what allows us to determine who we are and who we want to be. The conversation occurring today will determine the amount of trust we can place both in the technology that surrounds us and the government that regulates it.
Investigative journalist Glenn Greenwald has been entrusted with releasing some of the high-profile leaks by Edward Snowden over the past year, and he joins me now. We appreciate it, Glenn, for being here. And I want to tell our viewers there is a slight delay, so I'm just going to dive into our questions. Glenn, in that interview with the Washington Post, Snowden said his mission is already accomplished. So I wonder what your reaction was to that interview, and I wonder if you've spoken to him and when.
Yeah, I'm in regular contact with him. I've spoken with him since the interview, and I think the point that he was making was that as a whistleblower, his objective was not, as some people have said, to destroy NSA capabilities or anything like that, which he easily could have done if that were his intention, but simply to inform his fellow citizens about what their government was doing in the dark so that a serious debate around the world could be provoked. And I think he feels like that debate has been provoked, and he's quite gratified by the choice that he made.
Well, Glenn, a lot of people heard that interview, read it in the Washington Post, felt like he was spiking the football a bit because President Obama came out, seemed to suggest there were going to be some changes. Was that your perception?
No, I don't think so. I mean, remember, over the past 10 days, a federal court has declared the principal program that we first exposed to be unconstitutional. The president's own advisory board, along with that court, have said that these programs, this program in particular, is not, contrary to the claims of Obama officials, any important function at all in terms of stopping terrorist attacks. And so, of course, there's a lot of indication recently, in particular, for Edward Snowden. But it wasn't spiking the football as much as it was saying, my goal is not what some people in the government have claimed it is, which is to destroy these programs. And instead is to do what a whistleblower should do, which is bring these programs to light so that people can debate whether or not they ought to continue.
Glenn, Snowden has said his mission is accomplished. President Obama is going to come out in January and announce, it seems like, some changes. If he does announce changes, will Snowden stop leaking information? Will that be it?
Snowden hasn't leaked any information for 6 months. He gave us all the documents that we have back in Hong Kong in June. And as journalists, we've been going through the documents that he furnished us back then in order to figure out which are the newsworthy stories and find the best and most accurate way to report them. So as a journalist, I'm not going to conceal newsworthy stories from the public. I'm going to continue to report them until each and every last newsworthy story is published. And I assume the New York Times, the Guardian, the Washington Post, ProPublica, the other outlets that have Snowden documents feel the same way.
So just to be clear, Glenn, are you saying that whatever President Obama comes out and announces in January, you have more information to leak out that was provided to you by Edward Snowden?
Oh, sure. There are a lot more NSA stories that are extremely significant about what the NSA has been doing to the American people and to the privacy rights of people around the world that have not yet been reported, that absolutely will be reported. There's nothing President Obama or the United States government can do to force us to conceal newsworthy stories. How could we call ourselves journalists if we sat on newsworthy stories? Of course, we're going to continue to report them, and there are a lot more to report.
Well, Glenn, some people have looked at the journalists whom Snowden has chosen to give information to speak with. It's a select group of journalists. What do you say to your critics who say that you've become more of a spokesman for Edward Snowden?
I think that's ludicrous, is what I say to that. Every journalist has an agenda. We're on MSNBC now, where close to 24 hours a day, the agenda of President Obama and the Democratic Party are promoted, defended, glorified. The agenda of the Republican Party is undermined. That doesn't mean that the people who appear on MSNBC aren't journalists. They are. I think every journalist has a viewpoint. My viewpoint is very clear. I don't hide it. It's that I think what Edward Snowden did is very admirable and heroic. But at the same time, the ultimate test of a journalist is is what you publish accurate and reliable? And I think with regard to every story that we publish over the last 6 months, there hasn't been a single correction made to any of them. Very few have been called into question. And I think that's the ultimate question when it comes to, is this journalism?
Well, I think the point is not so much about MSNBC and what happens here, but more that sometimes when you talk about Edward Snowden, you do defend him. And some people wonder if that crosses a line.
Sure, I do defend him, just like people on MSNBC defend President Obama and his officials and Democratic Party leaders 24 hours a day.
Not everyone on MSNBC
I don't make any bones
does
about
that 24 hours a day.
No, not everybody, but a lot of people on MSNBC do. And so, sure, I don't make any bones about the fact that I consider what Edward Snowden did to be quite heroic, just like I consider what Chelsea Manning did to be heroic, and Daniel Ellsberg, who's one of my political heroes. I, as a journalist, am very grateful when people sacrifice their own interests to come forward and bring transparency to the United States government. That, to me, is what journalism is about, and we need a lot of that in the United States. So I absolutely do defend what Edward Snowden does, and I don't pretend otherwise.
In your conversations with him, Glenn, has he told you what his plans are? Do you expect him to be in Russia within the next year as you look forward?
Well, his asylum is temporary asylum for a period of 1 year, so I believe it has another 8 months to go. It's been in the news recently that he has spoken about the prospect of obtaining asylum from other countries or from Russia as well. I think what he wants to make sure is that the United States government doesn't apprehend him and put him into prison for the next 40 years and we'll never hear from him again. So I think his goal is to obtain political asylum, whether that's from Germany or Brazil or Russia. I think remains to be seen. That's still being debated.
And based on the fact that he is coming out and speaking out in these videos, what can we anticipate in this coming year? Will we hear more from him? Or is this sort of a one-time coming out given the recent developments, and is he going to go underground again?
I hope we'll hear more from him. I mean, he always had this sort of dual-track consideration, which is from the beginning he felt like it was his obligation to account to the public for what he did and to answer questions, which is why he didn't hide. He identified himself early on. At the same time, he didn't want the story to become about him, and so he turned down every TV request for the last 6 months so that the focus would be not on him but on the NSA and the substance of the revelations, and I think that's worked. But I do think he wants to participate in the debate that he helped to provoke, but doesn't want the focus to be on him or to have the attention paid to him. He wants to keep that on the NSA where it belongs.
All right, Glenn Greenwald, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.